With the current direction that RWBY is heading, we all know that it is inevitable that each of the relics are going to be found and shown throughout the RWBY series, which means that the Sword of Destruction currently hidden in Vacuo will be removed from its vault under Shade Academy, and will be utilized throughout the RWBY series. We're going to learn exactly what each and every relic is capable of, and the Sword of Destruction is not going to be an exception to that rule. They're not going to introduce all of these MacGuffins, the 4 relics, and not show us what they do. So the question becomes, who is going to be the one to wield the Sword of Destruction? Now, if you've been watching my Twitch streams at all recently, if you don't know, I stream on Twitch every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Make sure to follow over there, because I talk about RWBY all the time. And one of the things that I constantly get asked is, who's going to be using the Sword of Destruction? What do you think the Sword of Destruction is going to do? Now, I've already made a video on what I think each of the individual relics are going to be capable of. But with the Sword of Destruction, I believe that, unlike the other relics, the Sword of Destruction is going to actually require a cost to utilize it. To destroy something, you have to sacrifice something of yourself. In particular, portions of your soul, portions of your aura, something tangible, something that leaves a lasting effect. Because unlike creation, where, sure, you can create pretty much anything that you can describe and your heart can imagine, as long as it's something that you can describe to Ambrosius, then you can create it. The only caveat being that the thing that you previously created will disappear. That can't be true for destruction, because if you destroy one thing, and then want to destroy something else, they're not going to bring that other destroyed thing back. So there has to be something else associated with it. And I believe it would just be fitting that the Sword of Destruction requires a sacrifice from the user in the form of their aura and their soul. Which means that there is one character more likely than any other to wield the Sword of Destruction. That being Jaune Arc. The character that has been set up since the beginning of Volume 1. One of the very first instances that we see this man in any sort of combat setting. When Pyrrha awakens his aura, she notes that he has a lot of it. More than normal. And that is a repeated sentiment throughout the RWBY series. Jaune has an abnormal amount of aura. This fact is setting up for a payoff in the future. It is something that has been foreshadowed since the very beginning, and I think that is leading to the eventuality of Jaune wielding the Sword of Destruction. He will be the one to turn the tides in battle in the same way that the King of Vale did all those years ago in the Great War. Jaune will wield the Sword of the King, will inherit the King's will, whom I believe is a previous incarnation of Ozpin, and this is actually a little bit of a rehash, or rather an updated version, of a theory I had over 6 years ago. One of the very first theories that I posted to this channel was Jaune and the Will of the King. Before we even knew what form the relics took, before we had Volume 6, before we got the Lost Fable and knew everything about Ozpin and Salem's shared history, I made a theory that Jaune would wield the Sword of the King. Theorized at that point that the sword was the Relic of Destruction, and, you know, at that point in time, I was also saying that maybe Jaune's current weapon is already the Sword of Destruction, but no, that is absolutely not the case. We know what the sword looks like. It doesn't look like Jaune's weapon, but the fact that Jaune's weapon is a weapon from the time of the Great War, it is different than any weapon that currently exists in the RWBY series, at least, you know, as far as we've seen, where each individual wielder actually crafts and forges their weapon. Jaune inherited his from the Great War. And that has its own significance in and of itself. Like I mentioned in that video 6 years prior, Jaune's weapon is named Crocea Mors, which means Yellow Death. Now, given that his grandfather wielded it during the Great War, I came to the realization that back in that time, weapons likely were not named by the people who forged them. It wasn't like some child going to high school, forging their own weapon and being able to name it whatever they want. Weapons, back then, might have been named for the accomplishments of the wielder during various significant battles. The Great War being the most significant fight of Remnant's known history. Probably a more significant one would be, you know, the one the rebellion led against the gods that eventually led to humanity being wiped out, but, you know, that's unknown history. Anyways, Crocea Mors, being named Yellow Death, seems a fitting name for a sword wielded by someone who may have distinguished themselves in the battle in Vacuo surrounded by sand. Now, from what we've seen, the sand in Vacuo does look a little bit more red than, you know, the typical kind of golden beige color of sand that we're used to, that you might find on a beach or something of that nature. But the name Yellow Death could easily come from the Great War. And that could explain why Ozpin kind of had that recognition about Jaune. Either that, or the fact that he sensed Jaune's aura. The massive amount that he had, maybe he knew a soldier back in the Great War, maybe one of his right-hand men, maybe just someone who distinguished himself on the battlefield, and he recognized that potential in Jaune. And that is why Ozpin let him stay. Because I don't really believe that after an entire year, they wouldn't have figured out that Jaune probably doesn't really belong there. Glinda pretty much said as much in Volume 1. But regardless, Ozpin took that interest in him and let him stay at Beacon. There's also the fact that Tyrion took an interest in him in Volume 4. Now, that could be because of his aura, but it could be because of other reasons, but the fact remains, Tyrion took an interest in him. There is still something prominent about Jaune that is going to be explained at some point in the future. Whether he just has that natural affinity for aura or whether there's something else about him, I do believe it is leading to the point where he will wield the Sword of Destruction. And while RWBY might be the voice that brings Remnant together by sending out that call for aid to come to Atlas, and although it arrived too late, aid did come to Vacuo. All four of the kingdoms are together in some capacity. The world is still divided. Remnant is not united against Salem. Don't get me wrong there. That's a video that's coming in the future. But the fact remains, RWBY sent out that call, and that sent waves rippling throughout Remnant. Everyone knows about what is going on now. Everyone knows about the fight taking place. There are some that are taking up the fight, and there's others that are running from it. RWBY may be a symbol of hope, but Jaune, I think, could personify that symbol. If he takes to the battlefield wielding the Sword of Destruction, sacrificing himself, sacrificing his aura, and proving to others how someone, well, from what we've seen in the RWBY series, can grow from being essentially a buffoon character to someone worthy of standing on that battlefield, leading the forces of Remnant. Hell, he might even be the one to lead the charge from Vacuo back to Beacon if they are able to push Salem back. All it takes to turn the tide of battle is one person, with the maturity, the control, and the will to inspire the people around him. Jaune now has that, given all of the training that he's had over the course of the RWBY series, the extra 20 to 30 years that he spent in the Ever After. Yeah, his mind kind of went off the rails a little bit, but I find it impossible to believe that he didn't train at all during that time. He did have a broken sword, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean he didn't train with his aura, didn't train with his weapon, learning more about what he is capable of, and ultimately what he is not capable of. Learning what it means to succeed as well as fail. Jaune has gained a lot over the course of these volumes, and especially in the Ever After, and I think that will come to fruition in Volume 10. Jaune has the maturity and the resolve to do what needs to be done. He can become a symbol of hope in a different way than RWBY, taking to the battlefield and doing what needs to be done. If this course of events does play out, this will likely result in Jaune's death. Or at the very least, a very shortened lifespan, or maybe the complete removal of his abilities. You know, removing his aura while not destroying his soul. I know aura is the physical manifestation of one's soul, but maybe there's some way to separate that or make it so that the soul can't manifest an aura or something like that. And then Jaune just becomes a normal man. That is a sacrifice I'm sure he would make in a heartbeat to be able to protect Remnant, to protect the people that he cares about. That would make him a true hero, something that he always wanted to be, and he has worked towards since the very beginning. We saw back in Volume 2 that there's that statue in Beacon Academy that has a huntsman and huntress standing over a Grimm. Now, I noted in my previous video as well that the sword that huntsman is wielding looks oddly similar to Jaune's. Maybe that is a statue resembling his grandfather. Maybe that is something that Jaune knows a little bit about. But I think when Beacon might be reconstructed, there might be a statue standing in the center, with Jaune being the one depicted on it, alongside RWBY, most likely, as the two of them become the symbols of hope for the future of Remnant. A part of history not to be forgotten, for if we don't learn from history, we are destined to repeat it. And hopefully, Remnant will know that they need to unite against other threats that they might face. Now, who knows if there's going to be another threat like Salem, because, you know, I've mentioned this before, again, on my streams. A lot of people ask, do I want a sequel or a prequel to the RWBY series? Once RWBY comes to an end, do we want to continue the story, learn more about what RWBY and everyone is up to after the official conclusion of the RWBY series? And frankly, I don't want a sequel. Once Salem is dealt with, let that rest. Because Salem is a threat that has been building in Remnant for thousands and thousands of years. If, within a regular human lifespan like RWBY would have, there's another threat that pops up that would one-up Salem, because that's what sequel series always have to do, they have to introduce a stronger villain and everything, because the stakes always have to be raised, that just wouldn't, I don't think that would fit very well. Instead, let's go with a prequel series, and, you know, let's find out what Team Stark did during their time at Beacon Academy. I'm probably going to make a video on that at some point in the future, but still, the point of this video, Jaune, I think, will be the one to wield the Sword of Destruction. He will become the strongest huntsman on Remnant. A symbol for everyone on the battlefield and everyone that comes after. Where Jaune aspired to be like the huntsmen that he heard about, aspired to live up to the name of his grandfather, aspired to be a hero. Other people will aspire to be like Jaune. The fact that someone with no formal training entered the Huntsman Academies and made a difference. Not just a difference, but potentially the biggest difference at the point when the world needed him most. I think that Jaune has those capabilities. I think that that would be one hell of a story arc for Jaune. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want Jaune to die. But given that he is, or his character does take inspiration from Jaune Arc, it depends on how literal they want to carry through with that inspiration, but that might lead to the end of Jaune. And if he does die in that war, I'm sure that Pyrrha will greet him with open arms on the other side. And both of them will be proud of what they were able to accomplish in their lives on Remnant, fighting for the people that they cared for and fighting for what they thought was right. Then again, that can always happen at the end of Jaune's natural life as well, because I think there are also some other things being set up for Jaune, potentially a pairing between him and Weiss, but that also is a topic for another video. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. What do you guys think about the idea of Jaune wielding the Sword of Destruction, inheriting the will of the king and becoming a symbol for Remnant? A symbol for them to rally behind, a person that does unite Remnant, inspires people to fight alongside them, and truly helps the world be united for when the gods are eventually summoned. I look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. As I mentioned, I stream on Twitch every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, so make sure to follow me there. I'd love to chat about RWBY or anything else for that matter. And of course, make sure to subscribe to this channel as well if you enjoyed this theory video and wanted to see more like it. Join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video.